Hi, and welcome to CSCMP's Member Mondays. I'm your host, Tim Pajak, and I'm the Membership Engagement Manager at CSCMP. Today, we're very delighted to have Chris Torrence, Executive Vice President of Strategic Growth and Partnerships at Optimal Dynamics, a corporate member of CSCMP. Chris's company is based in Manhattan, but he's located in the Chicago area and frequently attends Chicago Roundtable events. Chris, welcome.
Thanks, Tim, for having me, man. Looking forward to the discussion.
Absolutely. I appreciate you joining us today. Why don't we start a little bit about your current role and a little background on your company. Just tell us a little bit about your firm and
Sure.
what you do there.
Yeah, so I'm, as you noted, had the privilege of leading a lot of the strategic sales initiatives and go-to-market strategy at Optimal Dynamics. We are a decision analytics / decision support SaaS-based software company. As you noted, we're in New York. We've been around for, I think we came out of stealth around circa 2017, 18, but we really didn't, hit that moment in the spotlight until closer to 2020. And I happened to be the first non-technical hire. So I was brought in early 2020, and I was a sales marketing army of one, if you will. And I often like to say, we are a startup by some definition, but we're also this continuation of global research and R&D at Princeton University up in Princeton, New Jersey. So our founder's a guy named Professor Warren Powell, and really Optimal Dynamics is we've taken all this lovely IP in the professor's head and we put it into a productized state, and that's kind of the genesis of Optimal Dynamics. So we, within the broader supply chain, as you have to drill down from there, we primarily work in the logistics side. And really within that space, we're primarily working with companies, big trucking companies that own assets, manage drivers. So that could be a dedicated fleet. It could be a for-hire carrier. It could be a shipper that has a private fleet or some mix of private fleet and dedicated carriers. But we're here to help them automate and optimize a lot of the decisions relative to strategic planning, tactical decisions, could be real-time dispatch. So really no facet within that particular area that we don't assist with in terms of the solution itself.
Fantastic, great background on the company. What was that like? Joining at that particular time? I feel like that's maybe the obvious question, but what was that like?
No, spot on. It was definitely one of those that had a few of my peers scratching their head because it's really, Tim, my first 0 to 1 company in terms of scaling. So I had been at some more established companies, some, on the brokerage side, some freight tech. LinkedIn can probably tell you the story under my profile, but this was the first time I wanted to really challenge myself to see if I can, and again, I use 0 to 1 because that seems to be the common term there for taking a company that, had some great ideas, but hadn't really got off the ground in terms of a commercial sense. And so, with 20 some years in the industry, I'm always looking for companies and products and solutions that are highly differentiated, but also serve a purpose in what I deem is like the next era of supply chain in our industry. And this was one that, like I said, when I tie it back to the phenomenal talent that we have from the professor and a lot of his PhDs there at Princeton, had no question if they're, do they have the brains? It's like much smarter than me, to be honest, but they needed someone who had that industry and domain experience that could kind of evangelize and get Optimal Dynamics to become a household name. And thankfully, after a few series of funding and a lot of interest from the broader industry, so we've got some great customers and partners, and it's been a fun ride. Definitely been a fun ride. So the risk paid off, in short.
Absolutely. And speaking of, kind of that industry experience you mentioned.
Yeah.
How did you first get introduced to supply chain or logistics,
Sure.
especially software side?
Yeah, that's a question I think we all get asked at one point, and I'll fall in the bucket of probably the majority of folks, at least of my age, that it was somewhat haphazard or happenstance. So my journey started working in the military, actually, the Department of Defense, and really namely the Air Force. And as I often tell people, maybe I watched Top Gun one too many times as a kid and wanted to be the next Maverick, and thought I was on that path, but ended up having a slight color blindness issue that they said that would unfortunately prevent me from being in the back of a $20-30 million aircraft. So I often say my commanding officer, when I got that news, had said, "Hey, what do you know about like the global logistics and supply chain?" And I said, I really didn't know much about it. But it was fascinating. And I felt if I'm going to be on the ground, that would be an interesting field to get into. And again, we're talking 20 some years ago. And when my commitment to the military was up, I said, man, this skill is probably going to translate well. And I think we can all agree, whether it's, especially since COVID and other of these black swan events, that supply chain and logistics has never been more in the forefront under the spotlight than it has in recent years. And that's validating to me that knowing I made the right career path and choice to kind of get in this arena. And as many folks will tell you, Tim, right, even those that leave logistics supply chain often get pulled back in just because it's once you leave, it's like you kind of crave that problem solving in the community through organizations like CSCMP, et cetera. So like I said, in short, it's been a phenomenal career ride, and I've thankfully worked at some great companies. And the software piece that you mentioned earlier, that to me, after doing, freight brokerage and seeing the evolution of tech from the investors in Silicon Valley, seeing what AI and automation, autonomous, and we could keep going, right? All that kind of led me to go, I want to be on that cutting edge, maybe even bleeding edge side of the technical side of our industry, and creating solutions that over my career, you always ask questions like, maybe one day we'll have a solution that can do X, Y, and Z. And I think now, and we're still only in the, I would say we're in the bottom of the first, maybe top of the second inning relative to what's possible in technology in our space. But again, I'm just glad to gotten where I've gotten, and I see, a lot of green field ahead of us as an industry. And I think technology is going to obviously play a huge role in that.
Yeah, this is fascinating. You touched on so many of my favorite topics when I'm talking to members there. First of all, the military background thing. I tell people all the time, it translates so well to this industry, right?
Sure.
And, it goes without saying that most folks that spend time in the military, a significant portion of what they do every day during that active duty is basically supply chain, moving people around, moving resources around.
That's right.
All that different stuff, no matter what part of that they're in. So it translates really well. Great industry for folks coming out of active duty to come to this industry. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then of course the technology piece, my goodness, there's so many things. It's funny to think of it. Hey, we're only in the second inning, right? Like, where is this going to all go? It's this wild. It is
an array of emotions when you think about it. Yeah.
Absolutely. What? So I guess it's kind of a two-part question. What are some of the biggest challenges that you're facing in your job right now, and where do you see technology solving some of those problems? I mean, obviously you're a software company, so
yeah. Somewhat biased in my answer probably, but I don't think I'm alone. So yeah, I think, going back to the challenges, it's just, we've been in a comfort zone, so to speak, for many, many years, decades in our industry. And, that's for a myriad of reasons. But I think, like I mentioned earlier, that we've just seen a huge onslaught of investment in tech. And I think that as a SaaS and software sales professional at this point in my career, and I've been an operator, by the way, for the first half, which was imperative for me to really understand as an operator where the opportunities exist to kind of leverage tech and automation. And so I think that, even though that we've made a significant strides, there's still a huge learning curve and a knowledge gap. And there's frankly a fear of change, right? That's human nature. So I think when we talk about challenges, Tim, I think there's a lot, and frankly, I think there's a lot of promises that have been made, say a decade ago. We don't have flying trucks yet. We don't have robots in the warehouses completely yet, right? And maybe that's coming, but going back, I think that the more that the industry, especially tech providers and vendors, can educate the buyer community, the shipper community, carriers, 3PLs, brokers, like it is an ecosystem. As we can really demonstrate what's possible. But often, as you'll hear me say, people ask me, someone reach out there, what is your LinkedIn, your title, your harmonizing man and machine in a unified logistics framework? That's a mouthful. So if I really just, boil it down, I'm a firm believer that their machines and AI and technology, there's certain tasks, repetitive tasks, redundancy often that tech is going to be able to replace. And that's a good thing. And I often tell people technology has been replacing human functions since the beginning of time, whether we realize it or not. And it's often opened up other avenues for talented folks to kind of pursue and leverage the tech to free up time for tasks that frankly just aren't generating any revenue. And machines are just better at math than we are. And a lot of supply chain is mathematical modeling. However, with that said, I am in this camp that I don't envision a day where we don't have a human and multiple humans remaining in the loop, just because the machines and the AI, it's going to take time, right? You look at ChatGPT-3 is, obviously a breakthrough moment, but I dare say if, a truck runs off the road and hits a tree, that AI or ChatGPT is going to tell you how to, instantly reconcile and intervene in those scenarios. So again, I think humans are just innately good at solving human problems. And I think machines are more complementary in nature. And that's kind of my view from a commercial standpoint now, and as an operator. And I think most people I talk to seem to unanimously agree that, yeah, it's a balancing act. It is a harmonization of sorts. And I think, again, the learning curve is how do we get the human operators in the cubicle or in the desk or at the warehouse or wherever they may be located to understand that fundamentally. And instead of having that fear come to mind, be more embracing of it and understand the upside. And like I said, I'm often very transparent that I'll reiterate, I don't envision a future where machines have, the Terminator 2 dystopian future where we're just, we've basically been made irrelevant by robots and machines. I don't think it'd ever be in my lifetime. I'll put it that way. So lots of challenges, but yeah, exciting.
It's like, as long as there's still an off switch somewhere, right?
Yeah.
If things go off the tracks,
that's right.
We can do that. But I think you make a good point is that I think it's I think it was Gary Vaynerchuk that I've been watching. Yeah, Gary V, and some of the stuff he's saying, just even in recent days, and talking about folks' resistance to cars versus horse and buggy. We can leap to computers versus typewriters, and the cell phone versus landline, and it just goes on and on and on.
Yeah.
There's always going to be some resistance initially, but to your point, it doesn't necessarily mean that. It means we have to adapt our thinking in terms of what jobs might be available to us, right? Because as you said, someone still has to be behind the computer, managing the software for this robot, or writing the code, fixing things when they break, right? There's still the human element is going to be there, and then on top of that, like you said, that the analytical piece of it too. Taking the human emotion part and knowing how to respond to something appropriately, right?
That's right. All the above are, absolutely have merit when you're saying, Tim. And again, that's going to be a cultural and a behavioral shift, which I can, in my experience, sometimes that change management is often the hardest part. You may have software that works great, but if there's that resistance to even adopting it or willingness to change, then often these projects just never get off the ground. And it's more fundamental than that. So the onus, in my opinion, when you're entering into a partnership, you need at the executive level on down full support. And again, the onus falls on the vendor, in my opinion, to really thoroughly and adequately describe the value add that you're bringing as a solutions provider, but also making them feel comfortable enough that they're not thinking I'm getting a pink slip at our next, conference meeting and whatever. And, I'm done. And therefore I have this natural resistance to even adopting this technology. So we have to be able to balance that. Again, that's the key word I'll often use. How do we balance it?
I love it. That's awesome. Well, I'm just looking at our time here, and I just want to kind of wrap up. And is there something I didn't ask you that you'd like to share, either about your company or just something that you'd like other CSCMP members to know about yourself?
Yeah. Tim, I think we absolutely, we owe it to CSCMP, and I've said it in my past. I owe a lot of my own career success and progression to CSCMP, in particular, among other trade show organizations, et cetera. I think that as the good news is, back in my day, we didn't have supply chain majors or logistics, and I'm happy to see that more tier one schools, universities, et cetera, are getting into that, because there's obviously the need is not going away. So I just, I want to make sure I give a plug to CSCMP, yourself as well, Tim, because there's opportunities. I attend some of the local roundtable stuff here in Chicago, and it's always refreshing to see not just old guys like myself, but see the next generation of supply chain professionals coming up. And the idea of, often the world is a who you know, not what you know. I believe there's truth in that. And so for me, like I said, ever since joining CSCMP many moons ago, I've developed some of the strongest relationships through networking that I could ever imagine. And it's been just absolutely phenomenal in terms of my own career advancement. As I said earlier, it's just, you never know who you're going to meet at any of these events. So I encourage anyone that's tuning in to, if you're not already a member, please consider it. Attend the EDGE conference, try to attend local chapter events. The knowledge is there. The community, the sense of community is huge. So, I'd be remiss if I didn't give a plug to your organization, Tim.
Appreciate that, Chris. And that is all the time we have today. Thank you so much for your membership with CSCMP. Thank you for taking the time to chat today. Appreciate you joining us for this edition of Member Mondays. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. My pleasure, Tim. Thanks for having me.